Hello everyone, it is Friday, October 22nd, 2010. I'm John Blicky, and this is the definitive AMD versus Intel series of videos. I'm going to try to break this up into separate videos because there's just so much to cover. But my goal is to help you guys understand what decision to go with as far as hardware, not just your CPU, but your motherboard. And the things I'm going to cover is socket compatibility, the longevity of your system and your money, the performance, the playable FPS, and the upgradability of these systems. So, and this is intended to help you guys not make the decision directly of which CPU specifically and which motherboard specifically, but to help you guys when you look at sources like Maximum PC, Tom's Hardware, Hard OCP, and other sources that are reasonably reliable, that you can read between the lines and really figure out, cut through all the BS, and figure out what you can get, what you should get, tailored to what your needs are. Now, my perspective is I am going to say I'm 95% a producer, 5% consumer. So I do some gaming. I wouldn't say I'm a hardcore gamer. I do like to play my games at 1920 by 1200 at insane settings. So some of you guys can relate to that. And I do web design and web development, but that is my main emphasis of my time spent. So I do a lot of virtualization because of Internet Explorer 9 now, because I run XP, and I'm actually thinking of going over to Kubuntu in face of the fact that the Ubuntu forums are filled with Zionist racists. So, you know, I'm not interested in Vista or Windows 7. I'm not like, oh, I have to have DirectX 11. I'm not interested in that. I'm more interested in enjoying the game. Quality only goes so far in games for me. It's about the game and having fun, and not so much of being able to say, I have an Uber system. So it's about being grounded in your decision when you make these harder decisions. Now, I'm going to say right off the bat, because I'm going to try to break these videos up. I don't know how many videos, depends on how I'm able to break it up into them. But I'm going to start with performance. And this is the key thing I think a lot of Intel fanboys are going to point out. Now, I'm going to clarify, I'm not an AMD fanboy. I do buy AMD because I feel this is a better choice. So that is, I'm not trying to say that I'm biased. I'm just explaining my decisions of why I went with AMD. And for those who are totally biased, you could stop watching the video because basically I'm going to totally prove those people wrong. But for everyone else who is level-headed and really actually cares about putting the thought into their decision, I'm going to get right to the meat and potatoes. So let's start with performance. When you hear Intel versus AMD on Tom's Hardware or Maximum PC, generally, not so much of Hard OCP because I think they're a little bit more level-headed there. Generally what you hear is that Intel absolutely trumps AMD in terms of sheer performance. Now, in that context, yes, Intel does trump AMD in sheer performance, but I'm going to give you a little hint on how that doesn't really count as much as most people think it does. See this? That's called a monitor, an LCD monitor. All right, let me make something very, very simple. 1 Hertz, 1 FPS. 60 Hertz, 60 FPS. 60 Hertz, 5,000 frames per second, 60 frames per second. All right. You cannot see physically, visually, mentally, on any level, see more than 60 frames a second on a 60 Hertz monitor. Some people are going to say, well, they have 120 Hertz monitors. 3D. 3D basically splits up the image and does this. Okay? That's why you have blue and red on those 3D goggles. So, to get 60 frames per second on a 3D monitor, you have to have the system pump out 120 frames a second. Now, I suppose you could just get a 120 Hertz monitor, which does cost more than regular monitors, and say it counts, but at that point, it's like, at what point do you say, is it 50, 60, 70, 80 frames per second that you're going to see more frames, that you're going to notice any actual additional performance? Now, I'm going to say, generally, if you're looking at 45 to 60 frames a second, you should be solid. I generally have not noticed any clipping. Some people, now, I think that's subjective to the game itself. Some games you can play reasonably smooth, even all the way down to 24 frames a second. I wouldn't want to be playing at 24 frames per second, but I'm saying that it is reasonably smooth and playable in some games, where some games you can't even play at 40 frames per second. So it is subjective to the game. And it is also going to be subjected to the video card, of course, and my general recommendation on that, even though this is more of a CPU thing, if you have a 128-bit memory interface, opt for GDDR5 minimal. I would not buy a video card with GDDR3 and 128-bit memory interface, because GDDR3 will send 2 pieces of information at a time, where GDDR5 will send 4. So it somewhat negates that bandwidth bottleneck. The memory interface is the bus between the GDDR memory and the GPU. So it's kind of like the bus between the RAM and the CPU on older systems that utilize buses, like the Pentium 4. So that's that clarification. But I'm going to try to say more along the lines of the performance and the CPU motherboard aspects of this. But I did want to cover that for gamers. So if you guys want to shoot a more up-to-date video about about video cards and whatnot. Though for now, alright, so performance. So sheer performance, when you see articles in Maxim PC and Tom's Hardware, and they're saying Intel absolutely owns, go Intel, go Intel, go Intel, that's only part of the picture. 1. 2, performance only goes so far. So past 60 frames per second, for I'd say about 95% of us, as 95% of gamers, not 95% of everyone, you can go with AMD. No problem. Alright? Because if you're getting playable frame rates, once you take into consideration everything else, AMD becomes a much more viable option. Because it's not just about performance. Because I'm also going to be talking about upgradability, socket compatibility, getting the most out of your money, which is kind of like the all-round issue here, and in addition to performance. So let's cover upgradability, and then I'll put the rest into the next video here. So, in regards to upgradability, I do a lot of reading, I do a lot of research. Socket 1156, you guys are not getting more than a quad core. And for clarification, for anyone who says hyper-threading CPUs with like 8 threads, those are not cores. There's a difference between a thread and a core. Hyper-threading takes a core and branches off a virtual core. So, for an example, I have an Atom-based netbook, and it does, hyper-threading will give you 10 to 20% added performance in some scenarios, but it's also been shown to absolutely get just break down and give in when you throw real threading at it. So it doesn't really count. So it's kind of like having 20% of a real core tops, maybe 10%, 15% I would say is a good middle ground. It doesn't really count as an actual core. So if you're interested in doing virtualization, I would say you want a real 6-core CPU. As yes, I am with my X3 unlocked to an X4 720 2.8 gigahertz Phenom AM3 CPU. Feeling a little bit uncomfortable. It's still kind of chugging. It's still getting decent performance, but keep in mind that all the AM3 CPUs are now like well over 3 gigahertz. I got my processor right when it came out, and it's a first stepping on top of that. So while I did get an unlocked core, it just does not OC for crap considering it's a Black Edition. I can hit like 3.1 and change but I can't get the 3.2 stable no matter what, no matter how much voltage I throw it. That's because it's the first stepping on the first series of CPUs built on a 45 nanometer. So, alright, so upgradability with 1156, 1366, and AM3 versus AM3 Plus. So, Intel has socket 1156, which is their mainstream, and you can't go past the quad core. They're killing the socket next year. If you don't have it, don't buy it. As far as CPU upgrades, if you don't have a quad, you can go to a quad. I would only recommend getting the cheapest quad if you don't have a quad but already have the socket. That is my only recommendation. But if you don't have that socket, don't buy it. Just don't. Socket 1366, this comes down to your budget. If you are absolutely flowing in money, and you're not the type of person who's going to be like, I'm on my third or fourth wife, or think that you're going to be like on your third or fourth wife by age 40 or 45, you can maintain a relationship, you're financially stable, and you can afford to buy a whole new system, like once every 3 or 4 years, then I would say socket 1366 is viable. Though for, I think, the vast majority of us, especially since males have been getting screwed over by this political correctness, I would say stay away from socket 1366. Don't get into that whole macho gotta have everything in the world thing, because at the end of the day, I'd rather kick my friend's ass if I'm better than him in the game, because having a capable system, yes, but if I can't kick his ass and I have a capable system, that's my fault. But I'd rather have a girlfriend and kick my friend's ass with a capable system if I have a capable system, versus having an overly capable system but not being able to afford to take a girlfriend out. Okay? So it's not just the hardware itself, but it's also you've got to keep in mind you don't want to spend as much money as you can. So that socket is basically going to die towards the end of 2011. And don't count on Intel to release an affordable 6-core. They only have a $900 and their $1,000 6-core right now. So, and Intel generally they don't want to give you guys, they don't want to give us, consumers, a good deal. So, and they're going to be replacing it with socket 2011, I think, which, that's going to be a quad channel system. And while this sounds pretty badass, again, I'm going to emphasize so much performance only goes so far. And it's not so much about getting your performance to go as far as you can push your performance. It's about getting your money to go as far as you can push your money. People don't understand, for example, food is getting more expensive. No, it's not. The price of food has not really changed all that much. It's the value of your dollar. The value of the dollar is worth less. Now, that's part of communism. I'm not going to get into politics. But that's the perspective you guys need to have, not this. And while this will give you reliable benchmarking numbers, and Tom's Hardware will too, they are not going to give you the feedback on what your best interest is when getting all the hardware. This is obviously going to go into a second video, maybe a third. I'm going to try to cover as much as I can and answer your questions. The next video I'm going to cover, I didn't cover the upgradability for the AMD system. So I'm going to cover that in the next video and just give you guys more of an overview. So I'll see you guys in the second video, and thanks for watching.